Arthur Corrigan sat in the back booth of the Quiet Man, the one upholstered in dark red leather, cracked and worn like an old man's hands. The booth was his throne. From it, he saw everything. The polished mahogany bar, the glint of light on the top-shelf bottles, the hushed movements of his bartender, a man who knew not to speak unless spoken to. He saw the door, the only way in and the only way out. His world was one of shadows and whispers, of deals made with a nod and promises sealed with a threat. He was the king of this small, dark kingdom. A kingdom built on the docks, on the unions, on the quiet understanding that Arthur Corrigan's word was more binding than any law. He was not a good man. He knew this. Good men did not survive in his world. But he was a man of principles. His principles. They were the steel beams that held up his empire. One of those principles was order. Routine. Every day for 7 years, a piece of that routine had occupied the third stool from the end of the bar. They called her the stray cat. Not to her face, of course. No one spoke to her. She was an old woman, with hair like spun silver and a coat that had seen better decades. Every afternoon at 4 o'clock, she would enter, silent as a ghost, and take her seat. She would order 1 glass of water with no ice. She would place a small, worn coin on the bar. Then, she would take out a ball of yarn and a pair of knitting needles, and for 2 hours, she would knit. At 6 o'clock, she would pack her things, leave the water untouched, and disappear back into the city. For 7 years. 2,555 days. A fixture. A part of the bar's very architecture. Arthur never spoke to her. She was a civilian. His world and hers were meant to be separate. A deep, unbridgeable chasm lay between them. He enforced that chasm. It kept people safe. It kept him in business. But tonight, something was different. It was 5:17. The woman stopped knitting. Her hands, usually so fluid and graceful, froze over a half-finished blue scarf. She placed the needles down on the bar with a soft click that seemed to echo in the silent room. She slid off the stool. She had never left the stool before 6 o'clock. Not once in 7 years. The routine was broken. The order was disturbed. Arthur felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. A change in routine was a harbinger. It meant something was wrong. His 2 men, stationed by the door, tensed. They watched the old woman, their hands instinctively moving to the jackets that concealed their hardware. The woman did not head for the door. Instead, she turned. She looked directly at the back booth. Directly at him. Her eyes were pale blue, clouded with a fear so profound it was almost tangible. She took a step toward him. One of his men, a young bull named Leo, moved to intercept her. A quiet word, a firm hand on the arm, and she would be escorted out. That was the protocol. But Arthur raised a single finger. A small gesture. An absolute command. Leo froze. The old woman walked toward the booth. Her steps were small, hesitant. The entire bar seemed to hold its breath. She was crossing the chasm. She was breaking the most important rule of all. She stopped at his table, her hands clutching a small, lumpy purse. She was trembling. "Mr. Corrigan," she whispered, her voice thin and reedy, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. He didn't answer. He just watched her. His face was a granite mask, unreadable. They say you can fix things," she continued, her voice cracking. "Things the police can't." He remained silent. His world was not for her. His services were not for rent to the likes of her. He fixed problems for men who understood the cost. She seemed to understand his silence. Her face fell, but a flicker of desperation burned through her fear. She fumbled with her purse, her knotted fingers struggling with the clasp. Finally, she pulled out the small, half-finished blue scarf. She laid it on the table between them. "This is all I have," she said, her eyes pleading. "It's not finished. But I can finish it." It's very warm wool. Please. I need to hire you. My granddaughter, they took my Lily. Stay with me until the end, because what happens next will change everything you think you know about strength and kindness. If you're enjoying this story, I'd be honored if you gave this video a like and hit that subscribe button. It helps more than you know. And I'd love to hear where you're watching from, so drop a comment down below. Now, let's get started. Arthur Corrigan's world was governed by a set of rules as rigid and unforgiving as the steel girders of the bridges that spanned the river. He was 62 years old, and for 40 of those years, he had lived by that code. It had kept him alive. It had made him powerful. Rule number 1, business is business. Emotion was a liability, a cancer that could rot an organization from the inside out. Decisions were made with the cold calculus of profit and loss, risk and reward. Rule number 2, stay in your lane. His lane was the docks, the transport unions, the quiet partnerships with men who wore expensive suits and had cleaner hands but dirtier souls. He didn't meddle in domestic disputes, in petty crimes, in the messy, unpredictable lives of civilians. It was sloppy. It attracted the wrong kind of attention. Rule number 3, the most important rule of all, no women, no children. Not as targets, not as clients, not as leverage. They were off limits. They were the sacred ground upon which no battle could be fought. To violate this rule was to invite a particular kind of wrath, a finality from which there was no return. This old woman, this stray cat, was asking him to break all 3 rules at once. She was pure emotion, a walking, trembling vessel of fear and desperation. Her problem was painfully domestic, a family matter that had spilled into the gutter. And at its heart was a child. A granddaughter. Lily. His lieutenant, Finn, stood a few feet away, his expression carefully neutral, but Arthur could feel his disapproval. Finn was a product of Arthur's world. He was loyal, intelligent, and utterly pragmatic. He saw the old woman not as a person, but as a problem. A violation of protocol. Arthur looked down at the scarf on the table. It was a simple thing. Knitted with cheap wool, the color of a winter sky. The stitches were tight and even, the work of patient, practiced hands. He did not see a scarf. He saw a different pair of hands, younger but just as worn, knitting a green sweater for a boy too poor to own a proper coat. He smelled the faint scent of lavender and soap that clung to his mother's clothes. He remembered the feel of that sweater, the rough comfort of it against his skin as he huddled in the cold tenement flat they called home. His mother had been a lot like this woman. Quiet. Proud. Invisible to the world. A stray cat herself, navigating a city that had no place for her. He remembered the day the men had come. They were landlords, or enforcers for the landlord. It didn't matter. They were men with cold eyes and loud voices, demanding money his mother didn't have. He was just a boy, 8 years old, hiding behind a threadbare curtain, watching her stand before them, small and defiant. She had pleaded. She had offered them what little she had. They had laughed. They had thrown their few belongings into the street. They had left her with nothing but a bruised arm and a shattered spirit. He remembered the look in her eyes that day. The same look he saw in the old woman's eyes now. The look of someone who had been pushed to the very edge of the world, with nowhere left to go. No one had helped his mother. No one had stood up for her. The world had simply looked away. That boy, hiding behind the curtain, had made a promise to himself. He would never be helpless again. And no one, if he could help it, would ever have that look in their eyes in his presence again. He had built an empire on that promise. An empire of fear and control, designed to keep the wolves at bay. But somewhere along the way, the boy behind the curtain had been buried. Buried under decades of violence, pragmatism, and cold, hard business. Now, an old woman with nothing but a half-finished scarf was digging him up. He finally looked at her. Really looked at her. He saw the faded floral print of her dress, the worn collar of her coat. He saw the way her hands were rubbed raw, the skin dry and cracked. These were the hands of a woman who worked, who cleaned, who cared for others. "Tell me," he said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the silence of the bar like a razor. The woman flinched, as if the sound itself was a shock. "My Lily," she began, her voice trembling. "She's 7 years old. Her father, her mother, my daughter, she passed away 2 years ago. It's just been me and Lily." She took a shaky breath, gathering herself. "Her father is a man named Marco. He was never any good. He left my daughter when Lily was just a baby. We haven't seen him in years. But he came back. A week ago." Arthur listened. He did not move. His stillness was unnerving, a predator waiting for the story to reveal its throat. "He wants money," she said, the words spilling out in a rush. "He said he's in trouble with some very bad people. He said he needs $10,000. I don't have it. I told him I don't have anything. I work cleaning houses. I have a small pension. It's enough for me and Lily to get by, nothing more." She paused, her eyes filling with tears. "Yesterday, I was at work. He came to the apartment. He took her. He took my Lily. He called me. He said if I don't get him the money by tomorrow night, I'll never see her again. He said his friends would take her." The air in the bar grew colder. The mention of friends taking a child crossed a line. It was a violation of that third, most sacred rule. This wasn't just a desperate father anymore. This was something else. Something uglier. "I went to the police," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They took a report. They said it was a parental custody dispute. They said since he is the legal father, it's not technically kidnapping. They said they would look into it. They told me to wait." Her face crumpled. "I can't wait. I know Marco. He's weak. He's scared. The men he's with, they are not weak. I know what they'll do. I know he's in over his head, and he's using my baby girl as a shield." Arthur knew the type. Marco was a bottom feeder. A rat who had gotten tangled up with sharks and was now trying to use his own child as chum to distract them. The sharks, in turn, would have no qualms about consuming them both. "Why me?" Arthur asked. It was the only question that mattered. The old woman looked down at her hands. "I hear things. In the houses I clean. The people I work for, they are wealthy. They talk. They speak your name. They say it in whispers. They say you own this part of the city. They say you are a hard man, a bad man. But they also say you have honor. That there are lines you do not cross." She looked up, and the fear in her eyes was joined by a sliver of hope, so fragile it was heartbreaking. "You are my only hope, Mr. Corrigan. There is no one else." The silence stretched. It was a physical thing, pressing in on them. Finn shifted his weight, a silent protest. Leo, by the door, kept his eyes forward, but his jaw was tight. This was wrong. This was a breach. Arthur looked from the old woman's desperate face to the blue scarf on the polished wood of his table. The scarf. His mother's green sweater. The cold tenement. The loud men. The helpless little boy. He had spent a lifetime building walls to keep that boy safe, to keep the world from ever hurting him again. He had become a monster to frighten away the other monsters. But what was the point of being a monster if you couldn't use that power to protect the truly helpless? What was the point of all the rules and all the control if, when a truly good and desperate person came to your door, you turned them away? He felt the foundations of his world shift. The steel beams of his principles groaned under a new, unfamiliar weight. The weight of a choice. He could send her away. Tell her this wasn't his business. He could maintain the order of his world, protect his interests, stay in his lane. It would be the smart move. The professional move. Or he could break every rule he had. He could step out of his lane, wade into the messy, emotional world of a civilian, and bring the full, terrifying weight of his organization down on a small-time crook and his dangerous friends. All for a woman who could pay him with nothing more than a piece of knitting. It was a terrible business decision. An emotional one. A catastrophic breach of protocol. He remembered his mother's face, not shattered and defeated, but as she was in his last memory of her, weak from sickness but her eyes still full of love for him. She had told him, her voice a fragile whisper, "Arthur, be a good boy. But if you can't be good, be strong. Be strong for those who can't be." He had been strong. But he had forgotten the second part of her wish. He reached out, his thick, scarred fingers closing around the soft wool of the blue scarf. The texture was warm, real. He looked at the old woman, whose name he still didn't know. He didn't need to. He knew her soul. He had known it his whole life. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice low and even. "Elara," she whispered. Arthur nodded slowly. He folded the scarf carefully and tucked it into the inside pocket of his coat, placing it over his heart. "I accept your payment, Elara," he said. The breath she had been holding escaped her in a quiet sob. Relief washed over her face, so potent it was as if she had aged backwards 10 years. Arthur turned his gaze to his lieutenant. "Finn," he said. The name was a command. Finn stepped forward, his face a mask of professional concern. "Boss?" "Find a man named Marco. Find out who he owes money to. Find out where they are holding the girl." Arthur's voice was flat, devoid of emotion, but it carried the chilling authority of a death sentence. "I want names. I want a location. I want it in 1 hour." Finn's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. "Boss, this is civilian. It's messy. It could bring heat." "Did I ask for your opinion, Finn?" Arthur's voice dropped, becoming gravelly and dangerous. "Or did I give you an order?" Finn's professionalism snapped back into place. He straightened his shoulders. "An order, boss." 1 hour. He turned and walked briskly toward the back office, already pulling out his phone. The machine was in motion. Arthur looked back at Elara. She was staring at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. She was seeing the monster she had hired. "Go home, Elara," he said, his voice softening slightly. "Stay by your phone. Do not talk to the police. Do not talk to anyone. When I have your granddaughter, I will call you." He gestured to Leo by the door. "Leo, get the lady a taxi. Pay for it from my tab. Make sure she gets home safely." Leo, surprised, nodded quickly. "Yes, boss." Elara hesitated. "But how can I?" "You hired me," Arthur cut her off gently. "The job will be done. Go home." She nodded, tears streaming silently down her face. She turned and let Leo guide her toward the door. As she left, she looked back one last time at the dark, imposing man in the back booth. The man who was her only hope. Arthur sat alone in the silence. He could feel the warmth of the small scarf through his shirt. It was a terrible business decision. But for the first time in a very long time, the boy behind the curtain felt like he had kept his promise. 47 minutes later, Finn returned. He stood by the table, his face grim. He placed a single sheet of paper in front of Arthur. "We have it," Finn said. Arthur picked up the paper. On it was a name, an address, and a brief summary. The name was Vincent Gallo. Arthur knew the name. Gallo was a loan shark. A particularly nasty piece of work who operated on the fringes, preying on the desperate. He had no honor, no code. He was a vulture who dealt in misery. He wasn't part of Arthur's world, he was a parasite that fed off its scraps. The address was an abandoned warehouse down by the old cannery district, a part of the city even the rats were thinking of leaving. The summary was simple. Marco owed Gallo $10,000 from a gambling debt. The deadline was tomorrow night. Gallo had taken the girl as collateral. He was known for making good on his threats. "Gallo is small time, boss," Finn said, his voice tight with disapproval. "But he's unpredictable. He has a crew of maybe 5 or 6 guys. Thugs. Not professionals." Arthur finished reading the paper. He folded it and put it in his pocket, next to the scarf. "Professionals don't use 7-year-old girls as collateral, Finn," he said quietly. "What's the plan?" Finn asked. He knew better than to argue further. The decision had been made. His job now was execution. Arthur looked up at him. His eyes were cold, like chips of ice. "There is no negotiation," Arthur said. "We are not going there to make a deal. We are not paying the debt. This is not a business transaction. This is pest control." He stood up, the first time he had moved from the booth all evening. He was a large man, not with the softness of age, but with the dense, solid presence of an old oak tree. "Get the car. Tell Liam and Connor to meet us out back. I want silence pieces. I want zip ties. I want absolute quiet." Finn nodded. "And the girl?" "Our first priority is securing the child," Arthur stated, his voice iron. "Connor will be on retrieval. You and Liam are on containment. No one leaves that warehouse. No 1 inch." "And Gallo?" Finn asked. Arthur paused, his hand on the back of the booth. "Gallo is mine." The ride to the cannery district was silent. The city light streaked past the blacked-out windows of the town car. Arthur stared out at the blur, but he wasn't seeing the city. He was seeing a warehouse. He was seeing a scared little girl. He felt the rage building inside him, a cold, controlled burn. It was an old friend, this rage. It had served him well over the years. But this time felt different. It wasn't about territory or money or respect. It was purer. It was about a broken rule. It was about a little boy behind a curtain who had grown up to become the monster the men in the room should have been afraid of. They pulled into a dark alley a block away from the warehouse. Liam and Connor were already there, waiting by a nondescript panel van. They were shadows, their faces hard and emotionless. They were his best. Men who moved without sound and worked without question. Arthur got out of the car. The air was cold and smelled of salt and decay. "Status," he said, his voice a low rumble. 2 guards at the front entrance, Liam reported. 1 more watching the back loading bay. Thermal shows 3, maybe 4 more inside. Heat signatures are clustered in a back office. "The girl?" Arthur asked. "There's a smaller, separate heat signature in an adjacent room. It's faint. Likely sleeping," Connor added. He was the retrieval expert, a former Special Forces soldier with a knack for getting in and out of places unseen. Arthur nodded. "Connor, you go in through the roof skylight. Your only objective is the girl. Get her out. Bring her to the van. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary. Are we clear?" "Crystal, boss," Connor said, already checking the straps on his gear. Arthur turned to the other 2. "Liam, you take the back. Finn, you and I take the front. We move on my signal. The guards are to be neutralized silently. No alarms. No phones. Once inside, we secure the main floor and move on the office." He looked at each of them in turn, his gaze hard. "This is not a smash and grab. This is a message. Vincent Gallo broke a rule. Tonight, he learns that rules have consequences." The men just nodded. They understood. Connor scaled a drainpipe and disappeared onto the roof like a phantom. Arthur watched him go, then turned his attention to the front of the warehouse. He could see the faint orange glow of a cigarette in the darkness by the main doors. He gave a small, sharp nod to Finn. It began. Finn and Arthur moved with a speed and silence that defied their age and size. They didn't run, they flowed through the shadows. The two guards at the front were young, bored, sharing a joke. They never saw them coming. There were two soft thuds, two quiet gasps of air, and then silence. Finn efficiently zip-tied their hands and feet, placing a strip of thick tape over their mouths. They were left unconscious in the shadows. From the back of the warehouse, Arthur heard a single, muffled sound. Liam's work was done. Arthur pulled a small radio from his coat. "Connor, we're in position." "I'm over the target room," Connor's voice crackled back. "Going in." Arthur looked at Finn. "Let's go." They slipped inside the warehouse through a side door. The cavernous space was filled with rotting crates and the ghosts of a dead industry. The only light came from a single bare bulb hanging over an office built into the far corner. They could hear the low murmur of voices from inside. They moved along the wall, using the stacks of crates for cover. Their movements were economical, practiced. The dance of predators. They reached the office door. Finn took one side, Arthur the other. Arthur held up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. On 0, Finn kicked the door open. It slammed against the interior wall with a crack like a gunshot. For a frozen second, the 4 men inside stared, their faces a mixture of shock and confusion. One was Vincent Gallo, a man with slicked back hair and a cheap suit, his face pale and fleshy. The other 3 were his muscle, caught in the middle of a card game. Marco, the girl's father, was not among them. He was likely with the child. The moment broke. One of the thugs reached for a gun on the table. He was too slow. Finn's weapon made a soft, coughing sound. The man jerked back, a look of surprise on his face, before slumping to the floor. The other 2 froze, their hands shooting into the air. Gallo stared at Arthur, his mouth agape. Recognition, and then terror, dawned in his eyes. "Corrigan," he breathed. "What is this?" "I have no business with you." "We have no." "Shut up, Vincent," Arthur said, stepping into the room. He walked past the 2 terrified thugs and stopped in front of Gallo's desk. He placed his hands on the desk and leaned forward, his presence filling the small office, sucking all the air out of it. "Where is the girl?" Arthur asked, his voice deceptively calm. Gallo swallowed hard, trying to regain his composure. "I don't know what you're talking about. This is my place of business. You can't just—" "The girl, Vincent," Arthur repeated, his voice dropping an octave. "The 7-year-old girl. Her name is Lily. You took her as collateral for a gambling debt from her worthless father. You are holding her in this building. Now, for the last time, where is she?" Gallo's face went white. He knew he was caught. She's in the back storage room. She's fine. Unharmed. We were just trying to scare the old lady into paying what's owed." Arthur's radio crackled. "Boss, I have the package. She's safe. Sleeping. On my way out." Relief, cold and sharp, cut through Arthur's rage. He straightened up. The first objective was complete. Now for the second. The message. He reached into his coat and pulled out the small, blue scarf. He let it unspool, then tossed it onto the desk in front of Gallo. "Do you know what this is, Vincent?" Gallo stared at the piece of knitting as if it were a snake. "No, what is it?" "This is payment," Arthur said. "This is the payment for a job. A job you created. An old woman, who has nothing in this world but her granddaughter, hired me with this scarf to get her back." He leaned in close, his voice a venomous whisper. "In our world, Vincent, there are rules. We are not animals. We do not prey on the weak, the old. And we do not, ever, touch the children. It is the one line we do not cross. Because without that line, we are nothing. We are just savages in suits." Gallo was trembling now. "It was just business, Arthur. A tactic. I wasn't going to hurt her." "You don't get to use her name," Arthur snarled, his composure finally cracking. He reached across the desk and grabbed the front of Gallo's shirt, hauling him halfway out of his chair. You brought a child into our world. You used her life, her safety, as a bargaining chip. For $10,000. You valued a child's soul at $10,000. He threw Gallo back into his chair. He turned to Finn. Find Marco. He should be in the room with the girl. Finn nodded and disappeared out the door. Arthur turned his attention back to Gallo. Your business with Marco is concluded. His debt is settled. Your business in this city, however, is permanently closed. Gallo started to plead, to bargain, but Arthur held up a hand. The finality in his eyes silenced him. Finn returned, pushing a terrified, whimpering Marco in front of him. Marco saw Gallo, then he saw Arthur Corrigan, and the color drained from his face. He knew who Arthur was. Everyone knew. You, Arthur said, his voice flat. You used your own daughter. Your own flesh and blood. Marco couldn't speak. He just shook his head, tears of pure fear rolling down his cheeks. Arthur had seen enough. He had no more words for these men. They were beneath words. They were vermin. Finn, he said, turning his back on them. Clean this up. I want Gallo and his crew gone. I want the warehouse wiped. I want it to be like they were never here. And I want a message sent. Let everyone know what happens when you break the rules. Finn nodded grimly. And him? He gestured to Marco. Arthur paused at the door. He looked back at the pathetic man who had started all of this. He thought about the pain he had caused Elara, the terror he had inflicted on his own child. Give him a bus ticket to the furthest city you can think of, Arthur said. Break both of his hands so he can never work, or harm anyone, in this town again. And tell him if I ever see his face in this city again, I will bury him myself. With that, Arthur walked out of the office and into the vast, dark warehouse. He didn't look back. The sounds of the cleanup were not his concern. The job was done. He stepped out into the cold night air. Connor was waiting by the van, the side door open. In the back, wrapped in a thick blanket, the little girl was still asleep, her face peaceful, untroubled. She was safe. Arthur stood there for a long moment, just watching her breathe. The cold rage inside him finally began to recede, replaced by a quiet, aching sense of peace. He had kept his promise. Arthur drove the van himself. He left his men to finish their grim work. This part, the conclusion, was his alone. He drove slowly, carefully, the sleeping child in the back a precious, fragile cargo. He parked across the street from Elara's small, neat apartment building. He looked at the window, where a single light burned. She was waiting. He called her from his phone. It's done, he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. Lily is safe. She's with me. She's sleeping. Come down to the street. He heard a choked sob on the other end, then the line went dead. A moment later, the front door of the building opened and Elara rushed out, her old coat thrown hastily over her nightgown. She saw the van and ran toward it, her steps unsteady. Arthur got out and opened the side door. Elara saw her granddaughter, safe and sound, and her legs gave out. She sagged against the van, weeping with a relief so profound it was painful to watch. Arthur gently scooped the sleeping child into his arms. Lily stirred, murmured something in her sleep, and then settled against his chest, her small hand clutching the lapel of his coat. He felt a strange, unfamiliar warmth spread through him. It had been a long time since he had held anything that wasn't broken. He carried the girl over to her grandmother. She's all right, he said quietly. She slept through the whole thing. Elara reached out, her trembling hands touching her granddaughter's face, her hair, as if to make sure she was real. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with tears. Oh, God, thank you. She looked up at him, at this terrifying, powerful man who had brought her world back from the brink. How can I ever repay you? She asked. I have some money saved. It's not much, but it's yours. Everything I have. Arthur shook his head. He looked down at the child in his arms, then back at the old woman. He reached into his coat and his hand rested on the blue scarf. You already paid me, Ilara, he said. You gave me something worth more than money. He didn't explain. He didn't need to. He knew she wouldn't understand the complexities of his world, the ghosts of his past. But he also knew, on some deeper level, that she understood the truth of his words. He gently transferred the sleeping child into Ilara's arms. As she held her granddaughter close, Lily's eyes fluttered open. She looked up sleepily, not at her grandmother, but at the large, dark figure standing over them. She wasn't afraid. Children often saw things more clearly than adults. They saw the intent behind the facade. She looked at Arthur's grim face, his expensive suit, and the shadows that clung to him like a second skin. Are you a king? She asked, her voice small and drowsy. Arthur was taken aback. He had been called many things in his life. Boss. Monster. Killer. But never a king. He knelt, bringing himself down to her level. He looked into her clear, innocent eyes. No, little one, he said, his voice a low rumble. I'm not a king. Are you a good guy? She asked, the question simple, direct, and impossibly complicated. Arthur was silent for a moment. He thought of the men in the warehouse. He thought of the empire he had built on fear. He thought of the darkness that lived inside him. He looked at the child, safe in her grandmother's arms, and then at the old woman who had trusted him. Sometimes, he answered, his voice rough with an emotion he couldn't name. The world needs monsters to fight other monsters. Tonight, I got to be the one who fights for the angels. He stood up, the moment of connection broken. He needed to return to his world of shadows. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple, stark white business card. On it, there was no name, no company. Just a single phone number. He handed it to Ilara. Keep this, he said. If he ever comes back, or if anyone ever bothers you or this little girl again, you call this number. It will be taken care of. He was offering her his protection. A lifetime guarantee. It was a gift he had never given a civilian before. Ilara took the card as if it were a sacred relic. She nodded, unable to speak through her tears. Arthur turned and walked back to his car, which Finn had just pulled up in. He got in without a backward glance. As the car pulled away, he looked in the rearview mirror. He saw the old woman holding her granddaughter, a small island of light and love in the dark, empty street. He had broken every one of his rules. And his kingdom was safer for it. 5 years passed. The quiet man remained unchanged, a timeless pocket in a city that was always in a hurry. Arthur Corrigan was older, his hair more silver than grey, the lines on his face carved deeper by time and worry. He still sat in the back booth, his throne, and watched over his small, dark kingdom. But something was different. On the wall behind the bar, in a simple black frame, was a collection of small, lumpy, hand-knitted animals. A bluebird. A yellow cat. A green dog. A red bear. A new one arrived in a small, neat box every Christmas. And every winter, when the wind howled off the river, Arthur wore a faded blue scarf tucked into the collar of his heavy wool coat. It was worn, the wool soft from years of use, but it was warmer than any other scarf he had ever owned. Ilara had passed away peacefully in her sleep 3 years after that night. She had lived to see her granddaughter grow, safe and happy, without a shadow of fear in her life. Lily, now a bright, confident 12-year-old, still sent the knitted animals. Sometimes, on her way home from school, she would stop by the bar. She would stand at the door, and the bartender, under Arthur's strict orders, would give her a bottle of soda and a chocolate bar. She would wave to the scary, quiet man in the back booth, and he, in a gesture no one else in his world ever saw, would give a small, almost imperceptible nod back. His men never understood it. They never understood the scarf, or the framed animals, or the special treatment for the girl. It was a breach of protocol, a strange sentimentality in a man made of iron. But they never questioned it. It was simply one of the boss's rules now. True strength is not measured by the walls we build to protect ourselves, but by the doors we are willing to open for others. It is not found in the power we wield, but in the compassion we show. Arthur Corrigan was a hard man, a product of a hard world, but he learned the most important lesson of his life from a stray cat who dared to move from her stool. He learned that sometimes, the most ruthless thing a man can do is to choose to be kind. And in saving one small life, he had, in the end, saved his own.